The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Giuseppe's Italian restaurant, casting warm golden light across the white tablecloth where Margaret Foster sat waiting for her younger brother. She checked her watch for the fourth time in 10 minutes, her fingers nervously adjusting the silver bracelet her late husband had given her 30 years ago. At 58, Margaret carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had weathered life's storms and emerged stronger, though the worry lines around her eyes told stories she rarely shared aloud. Her auburn hair, now threaded with silver, was pulled back in an elegant bun, and she wore a simple cream blouse with tailored navy slacks, professional but comfortable, the uniform of a woman who had learned to navigate boardrooms and family dinners with equal grace. She had called this lunch meeting 3 weeks ago, circling the date on her calendar with red ink and the word "important" written in capital letters. For months, she had been planning this conversation, rehearsing her words in the shower, practicing her pitch while driving to work, imagining every possible response her brother might give. This was the moment that would determine not just her future, but the future of everything their father had built. Thomas Foster walked through the restaurant entrance at exactly 1:15, 15 minutes late as he had been for everything since childhood. He was 53, 5 years younger than Margaret, with dark hair graying at the temples and the kind of easy smile that had always gotten him out of trouble. He wore an expensive suit that hung perfectly on his frame, Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than Margaret's monthly car payment, and a watch that could have fed a family for a year. Success had been good to Thomas, or at least the appearance of success had been. "Maggie, sorry I'm late," Thomas said, using the childhood nickname only he was allowed to use. He kissed her cheek and slid into the chair across from her, immediately signaling the waiter for a scotch on the rocks. Traffic was a nightmare coming from the city. Margaret smiled tightly. Thomas lived 20 minutes away. Not in the city, as he liked to imply, but she let it slide. "Pick your battles," her mother used to say. "Save your ammunition for what matters." "Thanks for making time," Margaret said, opening the leather portfolio she had brought with her. Inside were financial statements, business projections, architectural plans, and a vision she had been nurturing for the past year. "I know you're busy, so I'll get right to it. It's about Foster & Sons." Foster & Sons Construction had been founded by their father, William Foster, in 1972. He had started with nothing but a pickup truck, a toolbox, and an unshakable work ethic that had defined a generation. Over 40 years, he had built the company into one of the most respected commercial construction firms in the tri-state area, known for quality work, honest dealing, and a reputation that was worth more than any marketing campaign could buy. When William died 5 years ago, he had split the company equally between his two children, 60% of voting shares to Margaret, who had worked alongside him for 25 years, and 40% to Thomas, who had pursued his own ventures but remained a shareholder and occasional advisor. The company was worth approximately $15 million, employed 43 people, and had been Margaret's entire adult life. She had started as a receptionist at 19, worked her way through night school to get her business degree, learned estimating and project management from her father, and eventually became the operational heartbeat of the company. When William's health declined, Margaret had stepped into the CEO role seamlessly, maintaining the company's reputation while navigating the increasingly complex world of modern construction. Thomas, meanwhile, had gone to business school, worked for various startups in Silicon Valley, consulted for venture capital firms, and generally pursued what he called more dynamic opportunities. He both loved Foster & Sons in theory, loved telling people at parties that his family owned a construction company, but he had never loved the actual work, the early mornings, the difficult clients, the 1,000 small decisions that kept a business running. "What about it?" Thomas asked, his scotch arriving with impressive speed. He took a long sip, settling back in his chair, with the relaxed confidence of someone who had never been responsible for meeting payroll. Margaret slid the first document across the table. "I want to expand. There's a commercial property that just came on the market in Riverside, 12,000 square feet, perfect location, excellent access to the highway. We could build a state-of-the-art facility with modern equipment, Proper office space, room to grow our team. Right now, we're working out of Dad's old warehouse that's falling apart. We're losing bids because we don't have the capacity to take on larger projects. She was warming to her subject now, her voice gaining strength. I've been talking to contractors about green, building and sustainable construction. That's where the industry is heading, Thomas. Government contracts, corporate campuses, university buildings. Everyone wants LEED certification and net zero carbon footprints. We could position Foster & Sons as leaders in that space. I've already had preliminary conversations with 3 major clients who would commit to projects if we had the capacity. Margaret pulled out more documents. Market analysis, competitor research, financial projections showing a 30% revenue increase over 3 years. The purchase price for the property is $2 million. With renovations and equipment, we're looking at... I've secured financing for $2 million, but we need to put up $1.5 million from company reserves. This is our moment, Thomas. This is how we take Dad's legacy and build it into something even greater. She looked at her brother, her eyes shining with passion and possibility. This was the dream that had kept her awake at night. The vision that made her heart race with excitement. She had spent months on this proposal, had consulted with industry experts, had run the numbers 100 different ways. This wasn't reckless. This was calculated ambition, the kind their father would have respected. Thomas looked at the documents without touching them, his expression unreadable. He took another sip of his scotch, and Margaret felt her first flutter of unease. She had expected questions. Pushback, maybe, but this silence felt different. "Thomas," she prompted, "what do you think? I know it's a big investment, but the returns are—" "Maggie," Thomas interrupted gently, finally meeting her eyes. "I need to tell you something. I should have told you sooner, but I kept hoping I could find another way. There wasn't another way." The bottom dropped out of Margaret's stomach. She knew that tone. It was the same tone Thomas had used when he was 12 and had to tell their parents he'd wrecked Dad's truck. The same tone he'd used at 25 when he'd admitted he'd dropped out of grad school. The same tone that always preceded bad news. "What are you talking about?" Margaret's hands were suddenly cold despite the warm restaurant. Thomas pulled out his own folder, much thinner than Margaret's, and slid it across the table. "I've been having some financial difficulties. The last few ventures didn't work out the way I expected. I made some investments that went south. Got involved in a real estate deal that collapsed. I'm overextended, Maggie. Significantly overextended." Margaret opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were debt statements, collection notices, and at the bottom, a sales agreement. Her eyes scanned the document, not wanting to understand what she was reading, but unable to look away. "What is this?" 3 months ago, I was approached by Consolidated Construction Group. They're a national firm looking to expand their presence in the Northeast. They made an offer for Foster & Sons. A good offer. $13 million. Margaret felt like she was underwater, sounds muffled and distant. "An offer for Dad's company." "For our company," Thomas corrected quietly. "Maggie, I need the money. I'm facing bankruptcy. I could lose my house, my kids' college funds, everything. Consolidated's offer was a lifeline." "You told them no." It wasn't a question. It was a desperate statement of fact that Margaret needed to be true. Thomas's silence was her answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the restaurant noise. "I asked about selling the business, and the lawyer said we could proceed with my 40% stake as a minority stakeholder sale, which would trigger a change of control clause, or what?" Margaret's voice was sharp, cutting. "Or we sell the whole company." Consolidated wasn't interested in a 40% stake. They wanted controlling interest or nothing. So I started exploring a full sale. Thomas's words came faster now. Defensive. "I talked to some business brokers. They said the company valuation was solid. I reached out to you about it. Remember that dinner 6 weeks ago? When I asked if you'd ever considered selling?" Margaret did remember. She had laughed it off, thinking Thomas was just making conversation. Philosophical musings about the future. She had never imagined he was serious, that he was already laying groundwork. "You had no right," Margaret said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "No right to even explore this without talking to me properly. This company is my life, Thomas. It's everything Dad built. It's 43 employees who depend on us. It's our family's name and reputation. It's also my inheritance," Thomas shot back, his own frustration surfacing. Dad left me 40% for a reason. That's worth over $5 million. Money I'm entitled to access when I need it. You can't expect me to just sit on that asset while my life falls apart. So sell your shares to me. We could work out a payment plan. With what money, Maggie? You just told me you need $1.5 million for your expansion plan. You don't have $5 million lying around to buy me out. And I don't have time for payment plans. My creditors aren't interested in installment arrangements. The waiter approached to take their lunch order, read the tension at the table, and quickly retreated. Margaret's mind was racing, trying to find a solution, a loophole, any path that didn't lead to the destruction of everything she held dear. When? She asked finally. When did Consolidated make their offer? Thomas looked down at his hands. 2 months ago. But negotiations took time. Due diligence, legal review. We needed both shareholders to agree since it's a full sale. I had my lawyer reach out to you last month about reviewing some company documents. Margaret remembered receiving a request from a law firm she didn't recognize, asking her to sign some routine paperwork regarding company valuation and asset verification. She had been busy with 3 major projects, had skimmed the documents, seen Thomas's signature already on them, and assumed it was standard administrative work. She had signed without reading carefully, trusting her brother. I signed those papers, Margaret whispered, last month. What did I sign? Your agreement to entertain offers for the sale of Foster & Sons, and your acknowledgement that both shareholders would need to approve any final transaction. But I never approved a transaction. I never agreed to sell. Not yet, Thomas said, and his next words fell like an executioner's blade. But the board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow. Consolidated's offer is on the table. We vote, and Maggie, I need you to understand, I have to vote yes. I have no choice. There's always a choice. Margaret's voice rose, and nearby diners turned to look. She lowered her voice to an urgent whisper. You're choosing your mistakes over our family's legacy. You're choosing your bad investments over 43 people's livelihoods. You're choosing money over everything. Dad taught us about responsibility and commitment. That's not fair. Thomas's face flushed. You think I want this? You think I'm happy about it? I've spent the last 3 months trying to find another way. I talked to banks about loans, to private investors about funding. Nobody wants to lend money to someone who's already drowning in debt. Selling Foster & Sons is the only option that solves my problem. Your problem? Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. It's always been your problem, Thomas. Your problems, your needs, your latest crisis. Do you know what I did last week? I spent Tuesday evening with Jerry Martinez and his wife. Jerry's been our foreman for 17 years. His daughter just got accepted to State University. He was so proud, Thomas. So grateful that his steady job at Foster & Sons made it possible for his kid to go to college. What do I tell Jerry when Consolidated takes over? What do I tell Linda in accounting, who's 3 years from retirement? What do I tell Carlos and his entire crew who've been with us for over a decade? Consolidated promised to keep the existing staff for at least a year. Thomas offered weakly. At least a year, and then what? You know how these corporate acquisitions work. They keep people just long enough to extract the client relationships and key contracts. Then they consolidate operations, eliminate redundancies, and got what made the company special in the first place. Dad's name will be gone. Our reputation will be absorbed into some faceless corporation. Everything he built will be erased. Margaret grabbed her portfolio, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. When is this board meeting? Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, at the lawyer's office downtown. And the papers? The final sale agreement? Thomas hesitated, then said quietly, We signed them on Monday. The restaurant noise faded to nothing. Margaret felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Monday. You signed the papers to sell our father's company on Monday. And you're telling me on Thursday? I needed time to figure out how to explain. I knew you'd be upset. I needed to find the right words. There are no right words for betrayal, Thomas. Margaret's voice was ice. You didn't tell me because you're a coward. Because you knew that if you gave me time, I would fight this. I would find a way to stop it. There's nothing to stop. It's done. The only thing left is the formal board vote tomorrow to ratify the sale. And Maggie, you need to understand something. If you vote no, if you try to block this, I will sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. My lawyer says I have grounds. Because you're putting your emotional attachment above shareholder value. It'll be ugly, It'll be expensive, and it'll end the same way. The company will still be sold, but we'll have destroyed what's left of our relationship in the process." Margaret stared at her brother, really seeing him for perhaps the first time in years. She saw the desperation in his eyes. Yes, but also the selfishness, the entitlement, the same pattern that had repeated throughout his life. Thomas making bad decisions and expecting everyone else to shield him from the consequences. "You're right about one thing," Margaret said quietly. "This will destroy our relationship. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." She walked out of the restaurant, leaving her brother sitting alone with his expensive scotch and his expensive mistakes. The afternoon sun felt harsh now instead of warm. The world slightly tilted, everything familiar suddenly strange. Margaret drove on autopilot to Foster & Sons, to the warehouse where she had spent more hours than in her own home, where her father's presence still seemed to linger in the scent of sawdust and the echo of his laughter. The warehouse was busy with the controlled chaos of an active workday. Trucks were being loaded with materials for tomorrow's jobs. The crew was reviewing blueprints for next week's project. Linda was on the phone with a supplier, negotiating better prices with the friendly firmness she had perfected over 20 years. This was a living, breathing organism, and tomorrow it would be decided that its heart would be cut out and sold to the highest bidder. Margaret walked to her father's old office, which she had kept largely unchanged out of sentiment and superstition. His desk, his chair, his filing cabinet still, covered in the stickers her children had placed there years ago when they were small. On the wall hung the first contract Foster & Sons had ever won, framed and faded. For a small medical office building in 1972, $3,000. William Foster had framed it not because it was large, but because it was beginning. She sat in her father's chair and allowed herself, for the first time since the restaurant, to cry. Great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest. Grief for what was ending, rage at her brother's betrayal, fear for the future of the people who depended on her. She cried for her father, who had trusted his children to protect what he built. She cried for herself, for the dream she had been pitching just hours ago that now lay in ruins. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "Please come tomorrow. Please vote yes. Let's end this with dignity." Dignity. As if there was dignity in surrender. As if there was dignity in selling out. 43 families because one man couldn't manage his finances. Margaret almost threw her phone across the room but stopped herself. Wasting anger on broken technology wouldn't solve anything. She pulled up her father's final letter to her, the one he had written during his last hospitalization and asked his lawyer to deliver after his death. She had read it at least 100 times. But now she opened it again, searching for guidance, for wisdom, for some indication of what he would want her to do. "My dearest Maggie," the letter began in her father's shaky handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably feeling lost. That's okay. Let yourself feel it. But then, pick yourself up and keep building. That's what we do. We build. I'm leaving you the majority of Foster & Sons because I know you love it the way I do. Not the money or the prestige, but the work itself. The satisfaction of seeing a project come together, of solving problems, of creating something lasting. I'm leaving Thomas a substantial share because he's my son and I love him, but I'm trusting you to be the backbone, the foundation, the thing that holds strong when everything else shakes. You're going to face decisions I can't imagine. The world changes faster than I can keep up with anymore. But I want you to remember what this company is really about. It's not buildings and contracts. It's people. It's Jerry and his family, Linda and her grandkids, Carlos and his crew. It's the young people we train who go on to start their own companies. It's the community we serve and the standard we uphold. If you ever have to choose between money and people, choose people. If you ever have to choose between easy and right, choose right. And if you ever have to let go of something to protect what matters most, have the courage to let go. I built this company for you, Maggie, but it's yours now. Don't be trapped by what it was. Have the courage to decide what it should be. I trust you. I've always trusted you. Love, Dad. Margaret read that final paragraph 3 times. Don't be trapped by what it was. Have the courage to decide what it should be. She pulled out her laptop and began writing. All through the evening and into the night, she wrote, researched, made phone calls to people she thought might help. By 3 in the morning, she had a plan. It was audacious, risky, and would require trust from people she hoped still believed in her. By 6 in the morning, exhausted but determined, she had made a dozen more calls, sent a flurry of emails, and set things in motion. At 9:45 the next morning, Margaret walked into the downtown lawyer's office where the board meeting was scheduled. Thomas was already there, looking haggard and anxious, flanked by 2 lawyers Margaret didn't recognize. The consolidated representatives were present as well. 3 men in identical dark suits with bland, professional smiles. "Margaret," the head lawyer began, "we're here to conduct a formal vote on the sale of Foster and Sons to Consolidated Construction Group. As you know, the terms have been, I'm aware of the terms," Margaret interrupted, taking her seat at the conference table. "And I'm voting no." Thomas's face went pale. "Maggie, please. We talked about this. You know I know what you need, Thomas. And I know what our employees need and our clients and our father's legacy, so here's what's going to happen." Instead, Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick document. "I spent last night forming a new entity, Foster Legacy Construction. It's an employee-owned cooperative. I've spoken to every single employee at Foster & Sons, explained the situation, and offered them the opportunity to become owner-operators in the new company." She slid copies of the document to everyone at the table. 41 out of 43 employees have already committed. They're putting up their savings, taking equity instead of immediate raises, betting on themselves and each other. Additionally, I've secured commitments from 5 major clients who have agreed to transfer their contracts to the new company, contingent on it being led by the existing Foster & Sons team. The consolidated representatives exchanged glances. The head lawyer was reading the document with increasing interest. Thomas looked stricken, like he couldn't quite process what was happening. "Thomas, you want to sell Foster & Sons? Fine, sell it. Take Consolidated's money, pay your debts, solve your problems. I'm voting no on behalf of my 60%, which means the sale can't proceed as structured. But here's my offer to you. I will buy your 40% stake. Not at the $13 million valuation Consolidated offered for the whole company, but at a fair market value for a minority stake that doesn't include the company's future potential, which is approximately $4.2 million. Margaret slid another document across the table. "I don't have that money in cash, but I've secured financing through a combination of the employee, cooperative's commitments, a business loan, and a personal guarantee backed by my house and savings. You'll get your money, Thomas. It'll take 60 days to close, but you'll get it. And you'll be out, completely out. No more shareholder meetings, no more stake in decisions, no more connection to Foster & Sons or Foster Legacy Construction." Thomas was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. "You can't do this. The company is worth more than—" "The company is worth exactly what someone is willing to pay for it in a free transaction. Between willing parties," Margaret interrupted. "Consolidated wants the whole company. I'm offering to buy your minority stake at a fair valuation. That's my offer. Take it or leave it." One of the Consolidated representatives spoke up. "If Ms. Foster exercises her right to buy out her brother's shares, our acquisition offer is void. We're not interested in a partnership with an employee, cooperative, or a minority stake in a company that's being restructured. This meeting is over." They gathered their materials and left, their expensive shoes clicking against the marble floors, taking with them the easy solution to Thomas's problems. Thomas looked at Margaret with an expression she couldn't quite read. Anger. Certainly, but also something that might have been respect. "You planned this? All of it. You let me think you were going to fight the sale. But you were actually building a replacement." "I was protecting what matters," Margaret said simply. "Dad's letter reminded me that the company isn't the name on the door or the building we work in. It's the people. So I chose the people. I'm giving them ownership, equity, and control over their own futures. We're starting fresh, building something new that honors what Dad created while moving into the future. And what about me?" Thomas's voice was small, defeated. $2 million. Pay your debts, Thomas. Fix your life. Start over. But you don't. Get to take 43 families down with you just because you made bad choices. Margaret's voice softened slightly. "I love you. You're my brother. But I can't let you destroy something good just to save yourself from something you brought on yourself." The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Foster, you have three options. Accept your sister's offer. Sue her for breach of fiduciary duty, which will be expensive and protracted with no guaranteed outcome, or attempt to force a sale through the courts, which will take months and likely reduce the company's value significantly. I would advise you to take the offer. Thomas sat in silence for a long moment, his jaw working, his hands clenched. Finally, he looked at Margaret. When can I have the money? 60 days. I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork. Fine. Thomas stood, grabbed his briefcase. At the door, he paused without turning around. I hope your employee cooperative works out. I hope it was worth losing your brother over. I hope so too, Margaret said quietly. But I didn't lose you, Thomas. You lost yourself. He left without responding. The lawyer began organizing papers, discussing timelines and contingencies with Margaret, but she barely heard him. Her mind was already racing ahead to the million tasks required to actually launch. Foster Legacy Construction to make good on the promises she had made to her employees, to prove that this insane plan could actually work. 3 months later, Foster Legacy Construction held its official opening celebration in their newly renovated facility, not the 12,000 square foot property Margaret had originally wanted, but a smaller, more affordable space that suited their current needs with room to grow. The entire team was there, all now co-owners, all invested in the company's success in ways that went beyond just collecting a paycheck. Jerry Martinez, the longtime foreman who was now also a board member, stood with Margaret looking at the new sign being hung above the entrance. Your dad would be proud, you know. This is what he was really about. Taking care of people. Building something that lasts. I hope so, Margaret said. Some days I'm terrified we made a huge mistake. Other days I'm convinced we're building something revolutionary. Most days it's both, Jerry laughed. That's how you know you're doing something worth doing. Employee owners had elected Margaret as CEO, but she now answered to a board of directors drawn from their ranks. Decisions were made collectively. Profits were shared equitably. It was messy and complicated and required far more meetings than the old structure. But there was an energy to the company now, a sense of ownership and investment that couldn't be mandated from above. Foster Legacy Construction didn't land every bid or win every contract. They had growing pains and financial challenges and more than a few moments where Margaret lay, awake at night wondering if she had led 43 people off a cliff. But they also had something rare, a workplace where people felt valued, where innovation was encouraged, where success was shared. Thomas had taken his $4.2 million, paid his debts, and moved to Arizona. He and Margaret exchanged Christmas cards, but little else. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal still too raw. Maybe someday they would rebuild their relationship. Maybe someday Margaret would forgive him. But not yet. On the 1-year anniversary of Foster Legacy Construction's founding, Margaret stood in the facility at 6 in the morning before anyone else arrived. She held her father's final letter in her hands, reading it one more time in the quiet. Don't be trapped by what it was. Have the courage to decide what it should be. She had let go of Foster and Sons, had watched the company her father built be dissolved and transformed into something new. It had been the hardest decision of her life, made under the worst possible circumstances. But in letting go of the past, she had built a future where 43 families had control over their own destinies, a future where good work was rewarded with equity and ownership, a future that honored her father's values while embracing new possibilities. The employee owners began arriving, greeting each other, grabbing coffee, reviewing the day's projects. This was her legacy now. Not the company her father built, but the company she rebuilt from its ashes. Not preservation, but transformation. Not clinging to the past, but courageously creating the future. And when the morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the new sign that read, Foster Legacy Construction, employee-owned, community-focused, Margaret Foster smiled. Because sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on. Sometimes it's having the courage to let go and build something new. Thomas had signed the papers on Monday, but Margaret had signed something more important. She had signed on to a vision of business that put people before profits, community before convenience, and legacy before personal gain. And in doing so, she had created something her father would have been proud of. Not because it bore his name, but because it embodied his values, and that, in the end, was the only legacy that truly mattered.